All right. Thank you for coming out tonight. What I want to do a little bit before we start showing some videos is I just want to go through a review here a little bit, some of the things, and we've talked a lot about a lot of things, but there's just certain things that if I was going to prepare a student for, say, public education, I would just go through some things and let them know, okay, these are the things that you need to understand. And so these are the things we need to teach our children and our grandchildren and people, to understand, because our public school system is very secular now and very atheistic in a way, and that doesn't mean that all the teachers are that way or anything. It's just the mainstream philosophy that we have, in some of the cases that the Supreme Court has made over the past. Okay, so the first thing that I think is extremely important is the law of disorder, or it's called the law of entropy. So most of you probably know about that really well, but I'll just go over it a little bit here. Okay, basically what we see is if you leave things to themselves, if you just leave something alone and you don't do any kind of intelligence on it and you're not working it, everything runs down. If you buy a brand new car, as soon as you drive that car out on the driveway or start driving it, or as soon as it's made, it begins to degenerate, okay? And of course, there's different speeds at which things degenerate, but if you were to take that brand new car and just stick it in the driveway or stick it in the garage and leave it there for 30 years, it would degenerate just sitting in the garage. Things just go from order to disorder, everything left to themselves. And that totally defies the theory of evolution. Totally. I mean, that law should have blown the theory of evolution, should immediately, once they realize that. And the Bible teaches that over and over again. The Bible says the creation was subject to corruption. The Bible says the earth is growing old like a garment. It tells us that everything is running down. And so they knew that thousands of years ago. It was in the scriptures. We just learned about it in the last couple of hundred years. And that's what we see in nature. And so that should be taught, because that totally defies the theory of evolution. So remember that. Okay, there's a term out there, especially when they talk about geology, it's called uniformitarianism. The word uniformitarianism. What that means is that scientists are looking at the processes that are occurring on the earth today. Okay, so what kind of processes do we see? Of course, we see entropy. We see erosion, okay? We see disposition. We see this process of storms and things like that, and rain, and it's wearing things away, and things are running off into the rivers and in the oceans. We have deposits in the Gulf of Mexico. And there's this process going on, okay? Now, scientists will look at the processes that they see occurring right now and just assume that those processes have always been going in that same rate over millions and billions of years. Y'all see what I'm saying? So they're interpreting the past based on the present. Okay, well, they're assuming that nothing catastrophic has occurred in the past, and that everything you see just came about like slow and gradual processes over millions of years. And that's the term uniformitarianism that they use. And there was a geologist that came to our meetings, and he I'm sure he was taught this in geology classes, and basically that these processes that laid down the fossil record occurred over millions of years, and they're just assuming, they don't know. But actually, in the last, say, 20, 30, 40 years, scientists are starting to realize that when we look at the fossil record and we look at the layers that are laid down in the earth, the evidence points there was catastrophic event, maybe that caused each layer, but then the layers just sit there for millions of years and nothing happened. And that doesn't work either, because if a layer is laid out and just sits there, okay, the erosion, there should be a massive amounts of erosion. This eroding those layers, and then when the next layer comes along, we should see all this erosion between the layers, and we don't see that. So the best explanation is that the layers were laid down very rapidly during the flood. Melissa?
On the Mount St. Helens eruption, have they found fossils in that deposit?
Are you asking me if they have?
If they have.
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm sure, I would think they would, but maybe it might take a little while for them to find them. I'm not sure, but that's a good question. Have you gone online, like maybe to Answers in Genesis, and looked it up and see if yeah, and when you find something, text me and let me know. Okay. Okay, so uniformitarianism is that understood, that the process that occurring on the day, and that's how they interpret how old something is the rate that's occurring today has always been that way. But if the flood occurred, which the Bible tells us it destroyed all living things, tells us it destroyed the world, it destroyed the earth, basically, then there was a catastrophic event that they're leaving out, and they're not counting. And of course, they don't even like to think about the flood. When scientists are thinking all this, and the geologists and the biologists, they cringe to think about a flood, So they always contradict that. Okay, the fossil record that we see, okay, basically we see these fossils in many different layers. I've gone out and looked at different strata and found fossils myself. And, they're all over the world. They're found in the highest mountains. They're found, everywhere on Earth, just about the layers, not once everywhere, but a tremendous amount of fossil layers we see. And basically, the only way a fossil can form, there has to be some kind of event that covers up something alive very quickly. If something just goes out and dies, and this is what they say, it just died at the bottom of the lake and covered up. No, it's not going to form a fossil that way. It has to be covered up with mud or sand or rock very rapidly to fossilize. And so that supports the vent. And we don't see the transitional forms between the fossils. And, Darwin knew that. It was that way when his time. And he knew that was one of the serious and most gravest objections to his philosophy. One of them was the fossil record. And it's been 160, 70, 80 years since him, and it's gotten worse and worse and worse and worse. And the scientists know now that the fossils do not support the theory of evolution. The evolutionists know that, okay? All right. The philosophy of science, this is a big thing. It's not that they have all this evidence for the theory of evolution. Their philosophy demands that only one explanation be given. That's their philosophy. It's called naturalism. And naturalism basically is the philosophy that scientists came up with. They met back in Chicago back in the 1920s, and they all got together and they said, if you're going to do science, you can't infer there's any creator, any designer, any purpose, any cause, intelligent cause, or any of that kind of stuff. No God. It's just everything came about naturally. Okay, that's their philosophy. Okay, well then, that's their philosophy. Then they demand that only one explanation be given. And so if you were to go and do lots of science, and you could, and mathematically you could show there has to be a creator, there has to be a God, there has to be something that created all. It couldn't have come about because of the law of entropy and everything else, and present that in a scientific journal. As soon as they read that, they'd throw it out. That's not allowed. We don't allow that. Okay, the only thing allowed are naturalistic explanations. So people need to understand that. They think the scientists are just telling them this stuff because they have all this evidence. They're telling them this because that's the only thing that's allowed. And if I'm a scientist, and I'm still working, say, at a university or something like that, and if I don't have tenure, I'm really in trouble if I speak out, because there's lots of records of scientists who've actually published books and showed how the theory of evolution has major problems, and they get their throat cut. They don't get the tenure. They don't get the grants. They're enemies. So most of them, even though there's probably a whole lot of scientists out there who've learned there's major problems with the theory of evolution, they don't speak out, because if they speak out, it may cause them a lot of money, cause them to lose a lot of money. I mean, that's sad, but that's the way it is. I mean, it's one of those things. So it's because of the philosophy of naturalism. All that exists is matter and energy. There's nothing else. Okay. There are many ways to date the Earth. And so probably I have a book at home. It's got about 100 different ways to date how old the Earth is. Okay. And there's some of the dates that they give really old ages, and some of the processes that they use to give young ages. Okay. Of course, the evolutionists, since they know this. If you ask, the first thing I would do if I was debating somebody, I'd say, when was the last time you did research and you actually saw a new protein that you knew never existed before, a new gene system, a new trait? Because if the theory of evolution is true, then we should see that. We should see this new information, because in our cells is the most complex information system in the whole universe. I mean, and I think scientists, they know a lot, and they've learned a lot, but I bet, I don't know. I'd hate to even make a number, but they may only know 20% of what can be known. And I always told my students, science never know how much they don't know. They don't. And they may only know 5, 10, 15, 20%, and they may give everybody else this impression that they know it all. But if you only know a small percentage, you have a lot to learn. You got to be careful about what you're telling people, about things. So, a couple of ways to date the Earth. The thing that I think is one of the biggest problems they have. The Earth has a magnetic field around it. It's called the Earth's electromagnetic field, and it shields us from cosmic radiation that comes from outer space. If we didn't have that shield, we wouldn't be able to live. It protects us. Outer space is a hazardous place to be. I don't want to go in outer space because unless everything's perfect, you're in trouble. So you got to have everything right. You have a massive amount of technology to keep you alive. But anyway, this electromagnetic field has a half-life of 1,400 years. So what does that mean? That means 1,400 years ago, okay, it had twice the power that it has today. Twice as much. I mean, that's major. Just 1,400 years ago. That was when Islam started back then. Okay, so basically, and now if you extrapolate forward 1,400 years, the Earth's magnetic field will only be half as strong as it is right now. Whoa, just 1,400 years? So there's a major, and of course, they always have ways of explaining things away. I'm just looking at the way it should be interpreted. Of course, science know this, and they always have an excuse for something. So because what? Well, the Earth is billions. My wife talked to a Christian the other day at a church picnic, and the first thing he says was, "Well, everybody knows the Earth is billions of years old." We've been told that. We've been told that. We've been told that. We've been told that. Told that. And told that. And they're major. The way they date the Earth by radiometric dating, that rocks are decaying, the uranium decays into lead. Even that process, it is corrected as far as the dating, the rate at which the process is occurring. That's true. The rate is that. They can see that. We can see that. All creationists and evolutionists agree. Yes, the rate is decaying at a certain rate. We can measure that, and we know it's there. But do they always know the rate has always been that way since billions of years ago? They don't know that. But they don't tell people that. Okay, so there's a major problem in even their dating method they use to give the Earth billions of years. Okay, and again, there's many, many ways to date the Earth. They all have assumptions. So if they're going to teach that, at least teach the students the assumptions. We have an assumption. We don't know if there hasn't been a mixing, if some of the daughter material hasn't been added to that sample. We don't know if some of it has been lost. They don't tell them that. We don't know if the rate of decay has always been the same. They don't tell them that. Why don't they tell them? I mean, that's the way science is supposed to be. You just don't do that because there's only one explanation, and that's the theory of evolution. So you see what I'm saying? If we get these things in us, and then when we talk to people, students and things that are going to this, they need to be aware of this. They need to be aware of these things before they start the science classes because they're going to get blown away. If they're not, they're going to get shocked. And there's horror stories that we have heard. People that even go to this church, they send their kids off to universities, and man, they just like, Mom, Dad, why didn't you tell me all this stuff? Why didn't you do that? And they're like, everything they heard in college was true, and everything they were taught when they were growing up is wrong. This is sad. Okay.
Roger, some of the new things that are coming out, the Earth is flat. You need to have a class on that.
Yeah. Even the Earth teaches that the Earth is, even the Bible teaches that the Earth is a sphere, that it's not flat. So, yeah, it's we need to be ready to defend our faith. We need to be ready to give an account. The Bible says that. I think it's 1 Peter 3:15. Always be ready to give account to every man who asks you the hope that it's in you. Okay, the complexity of a cell, and that's what a lot of we're going to talk about today. This is really, unless you've studied, and unless you've studied this, it's almost like, I don't know how you explain it, but the cell is the most complex information system in the universe. I mean, it just staggers my mind to look at a cell and look at what's going on. And again, I don't know probably 5% of what's going on in a cell, and just the 5% I know makes me want to go, whoa. You know, and scientists are seeing that today, and it's causing them to become believers, because they look at the complexity of the cell and they say, there has to be a creator. This couldn't have come. This is insane for us to believe that this just came about by time and chance over millions of years, and they become Christians. And most of those, though, are people who have retired, or, you know, if they're too outspoken right away and they're just getting started and just a young professor or something like that, and they speak out like that, it's not going to be good for them, okay, because it's just the way it is. But that's some of the things. If we just did the math, you know, there has to be a creator. If you went into a court of law and you had all the judges or whatever, everybody wasn't already brainwashed into thinking the theory of evolution were true, and you just presented the evidence, the judge would go, this is ridiculous, we're throwing this thing out. Of course there's a creator. It's stupid to think that there's not one. There has to be one. Of course they wouldn't do that, you know, because even the judges are under pressure to go along with the humanist idea. Okay, mutations are changes that only change genes that already exist. They don't give us any way to produce anything new. They're just changes in the DNA that already exist. So that doesn't tell us how the DNA got there or how the genes got there. All the mutations are doing, and that's what we see. It goes back to entropy. The only change we're seeing is everything is running down. Okay, human beings. I probably told you this already, and it was presented in some of the videos we saw. But this is another thing. Human beings, they have studied the human genome for the last, really intensely, in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And all the top geneticists in the world, they know this. They're not telling everybody this, but they know it. Okay, that the human genome is degenerating at somewhere between 1 to 2, 3% per generation. We human beings are degenerating very fast. Okay, we're not getting better, although, you know, they think we are, because we look at the athletes and they go, oh, look at those bodies they got and all that kind of stuff. Well, there's two ways to look at something. Genetically, the phenotype and the outward appearance, or how you take care of it, and then what's going on inside your genome. And what's going on in all of our genomes is we're running down. Every generation is getting more mutations, more mutations, more mutations, more mutations, more mutations, you know, and if long enough, we're going to go extinct. You know, if I was going to guess, if Jesus hadn't come back, probably in 1,000 years or at least 1,500 years, humans would all be dead by then. You know, there wouldn't be a survive, because that curve eventually goes like this, and then it starts going up. So a lot of degeneration right now, and then eventually it'll shoot up, and so. But anyway, but we have good news, don't we? We have a hope. We don't have to worry about that. Okay. Okay. Natural selection does not only selects what already exists, doesn't create anything, and they use natural selection mutation for their theory. The laws of probability contradict the theory of evolution. The laws of science, the laws of chemistry, the laws of physics, the laws of nature, the laws of cause and effect, all those laws contradict the theory of evolution. And yet, the theory of evolution is taught as a fact. I mean, it's just crazy the way it's been. Okay, okay, Cynthia, Pastor Cynthia, are you there? Yeah. She's our pastor now.
These are tiny molecular machines, and they are doing this
just
inside
think about
your
all
body
these machines
right
have to
now.
have many machines to build
Why
those machines.
We have to zoom out.
And they all have to be built
Every day
just right,
in an adult
in the right
human
way,
body,
in the right time. Go ahead, Cynthia.
50 to 70 billion of your cells die. Either they're stressed or damaged or just old. But this is normal. In fact, it's called programmed cell death. But to make up for all these lost cells, right now, billions of your cells are dividing, essentially creating new cells. And that process of cell division, also called mitosis, well, it requires an army of tiny molecular machines. So let's take a closer look. DNA is a good place to start, the double helix molecule we always talk about.
Okay,
this
Cynthia,
is
stop that for a
scientifically
second.
accurate.
Okay, and again, this is just the latest research, but this will blow your mind. Okay, and again, a lot of times they find out stuff like that, it's almost like they don't want to tell anybody. Because if we tell somebody, they'll see that there has to be a creator if we tell them this, because this is so fantastic. Well, this is what they're seeing now. They've done some research on DNA, the genome, okay? And what they're finding is that it's emitting electromagnetic energy. So what does that tell you? Well, how do we talk to each other today? We talk to each other because of electromagnetic energy. There's waves going through this room all the time. But we know some of them are there. We see the light, the visible light. We can see that with our eyes. But then there's others outside of that spectrum and that wavelength that we can't see with our eyes and we can't hear. But they're there. We pick these up in our phone. Well, guess what could be happening in the cell right now? The DNA is communicating to other parts of the cell like we communicate with our cell phones. And they are picking up information. How would they know what to build? There's things that have to be built all the time in the cell. You mean that part has to travel all the way down to the nucleus and figure out where to find the information and know where to go and all that? No, there's communication information that's going through the cell to communicate with what's going on, and the DNA probably knows everything that's going on outside the cell just by that electromagnetic energy. Now, they're just starting in this. This is really just, but I mean, if you think about it, whoa. And if that gets out, anyway. Okay, Cynthia.
Depiction of DNA created by Drew Barry at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research. If you unwind the two strands, you can see that each has a sugar phosphate backbone connected to the sequence of nucleic acid base pairs, known by the letters A, T, G, and C. Now, the strands run in opposite directions, which is important when you go to copy DNA. Copying DNA is one of the first steps in cell division. Here, the two strands of DNA are being unwound and separated by the tiny blue molecular machine called helicase. Helicase literally spins as fast as a jet engine. The strand of DNA on the right has its complementary strand assembled continuously, but the other strand is more complicated because it runs in the opposite direction. So it must be looped out with its complementary strand assembled in reverse, section by section. At the end of this process, you have two identical DNA molecules, each one a few centimeters long, but just a couple nanometers wide. So to prevent the DNA from becoming a tangled mess, it is wrapped around proteins called histones, forming a nucleosome. These nucleosomes are bundled together into a fiber known as chromatin, which is further looped and coiled to form a chromosome, one of the largest molecular structures in your body. You can actually see chromosomes under a microscope in dividing cells. Only then do they take on their characteristic shape. Otherwise, the DNA is more strewn inside the nucleus. The process of dividing a cell takes around an hour in mammals, so this footage is from a time lapse. You can see how the chromosomes line up on the equator of the cell. Now, when everything is right, they are pulled apart into the two new daughter cells, each one containing an identical copy of DNA. Now, as simple as this looks, the process is incredibly complicated and requires even more fascinating molecular machines to accomplish it. So let's look at a single chromosome. One chromosome consists of two sausage-shaped chromatids containing the identical copies of DNA made earlier. Each chromatid is attached to microtubule fibers, which guide and help align them in the correct position. The microtubules are connected to the chromatid at the kinetochore, here colored red. The kinetochore consists of hundreds of different proteins working together to achieve multiple objectives. In fact, it's one of the most sophisticated molecular mechanisms inside your body. The kinetochore is central to the successful separation of the chromatids. It creates a dynamic connection between the chromosome and the microtubules. For a reason no one's yet been able to figure out, the microtubules are constantly being built at one end and deconstructed at the other. While the chromosome is still getting ready, the kinet...
Okay, now when we think of the cell, think of it, one way you could think of a cell is like a city, okay? like a city, a giant city like Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we think the whole city and everything in the city and all the cars and all the roads and all the power plants and the recycling plants and all that kind of stuff and electricity and all that. We'd say that was pretty complex, wouldn't we? Okay. Well, guess what? How long does it take us to build a super highway? It takes years and years and years. Cells can build super highways in a matter of probably an hour. I mean, and they can break them down in an hour. So you've got stuff going on all times in the cells that's building things so fast, it's incredibly fast. You wouldn't believe it, where these highways, and they're going to be the strands where the chromosomes can to divide over. But remember what he was saying, they're building as fast on one end and they're losing as fast on the other end. And they're being built. And then even when it's not dividing like this, you still have highways and stuff throughout the cells where you have machines that are carrying things from one thing to another. Now, one scientist said this about the cell. He said, if you took all the machines that man has ever built, think about that, all the machines that man has ever built, okay? We can't even imagine that. We don't have any idea, but just think of the cell phones, computers, spaceships, aircraft carriers, 747s, all those machines, all that kind of stuff. You took all those things and you put them together and we made this gigantic machine out of it. The most complex machine in the world. It was able, maybe it's like a super spaceship that just took off and could break the Earth's atmosphere and go to the moon and land on the moon and come back and do it. That would be pretty complicated, wouldn't it? It still wouldn't be near as complex as a cell. And anybody believes that something like that big old spaceship could just evolve by itself, they'd all laugh at them. And yet what we have here is something much more complex. And besides that, within about 5 hours, we can produce another cell that's like that big spaceship. So you think about the complexity of a cell. I just want to scream sometimes and saying, how could that happen? But the whole world is in darkness. And it really doesn't matter what the truth is. And it doesn't matter what's right or wrong. If you don't know Jesus Christ, you're in darkness, and you walk in darkness, and the darkness has blinded your eyes. And that's what's happened to the world. They're in darkness. And even though it's all right there in front of them, they should be able to see it. They can't. Okay, Cynthia.
Kinetochore sends out a chemical stop signal to the rest of the cell, shown here by the red molecules, basically saying this chromosome is not yet ready to divide. The kinetochore also mechanically senses tension. When the tension is just right and the position and attachment are correct, all the proteins get ready, shown here by turning green. At this point, the stop signal broadcasting system is not switched off. Instead, it is literally carried away from the kinetochore down the microtubules by a dynein motor. That's the walking guy. This is really what it looks like. It has long legs so it can avoid obstacles and step over the kinesins, molecular motors that walk in the opposite direction. These are tiny molecular machines, and they are doing this inside your body right now. To understand why, we have to zoom out.
Every day in an adult human body.
Okay, we're going to watch another one. That's the end of that one. The next one is called Inner Life of the Cell. Okay. I know you all have read this hundreds of times, but I think it's a good scripture to read. It's Romans 1:19. Because that which is known about God is evident within them in their inner consciousness, for God made it evident to them. For ever since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes, his eternal power, and his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood through his workmanship, all his creation, the wonderful things that he has made, so that they who fail to believe and trust in him are without excuse. And we've always known this, and man has always known this. It's obvious, you just think about it, but now we're looking down inside us, and we're seeing complexity that just staggers the imagination, just makes you want to, look at that. Anyway, okay, Cynthia.
Here is a cell, the basic unit of all living tissue. In most human cells, there is a structure called the nucleus.
Okay, Cynthia, stop it there.
The nucleus contains the
Back it up just a little bit so we can see most of the cell. Okay, here's the thing why there has to be a creator, okay? Inside of a cell, you've got all these different organelles, like little organs, and every one of them has a function to do. You have organelles that produce energy. They're called mitochondria. You have organelles in plants that are called chloroplasts that literally take the sun energy in, okay, and water and carbon dioxide and break the molecules and change light energy into chemical energy. And we either eat the plant or eat the animal that ate the plant. You have organelles in the cell that basically build, it's like manufacturing, that actually build proteins. You have organelles in the cell that go around and clean up the cell all the time. The cell's getting messy, just like our rooms get messy. Can you imagine if you don't go in your room and clean it up for a week or so? It's going to look pretty bad, isn't it? Okay, don't tell anybody, but anyway, you have all these organelles that are working. Okay, the Bible says that God created the earth in 6 days, 6 literal days. It had to be that way. It couldn't have slowly but surely happened by time and chance, okay? Everything in that cell has to be working, everything, not just 99% of it, everything in that cell has to be working just right the way it's supposed to, or the cell's not going to work and it's going to die. And that's kind of what we saw there a little bit, and they're going to talk about it. Okay, Cynthia.
tissue. In most human cells, there is a structure called the nucleus. The nucleus contains the genome. In humans, the genome is split between 23 pairs of chromosomes. Each chromosome contains a long strand of DNA, tightly packaged around proteins called histones. Within the DNA are sections called genes. These genes contain the instructions for making proteins. When a gene is switched on, an enzyme called RNA polymerase attaches to the start of the gene. It moves along the DNA, making a strand of messenger RNA out of free bases in the nucleus. The DNA code determines the order in which the free
Cynthia,
bases
stop
are
it there.
added.
Okay, now this machine that they showed, obviously it just looks like a big old blob, but obviously this is a very, very complex machine to grab a hold of the DNA just at the right place. It has to do it at the right place. It's just not randomly going, well, let's pick this spot and this will work. No, somehow the DNA is knowing what's going on outside the cell and immediately realizes, oh, we have a protein, we have a breakdown here. This part of this organelle needs to be repaired. We need this new protein to build this thing. And so immediately it goes in and it starts to divide the DNA at just the right spot. That's called the gene. The segment of DNA contains the information to produce the protein that needs to do the job. Okay, well, these are the little letters up here. Each one there's 3 of these letters. You got adenine, cytosine, thymine, and guanine, and they code for 3 of them together code for a particular amino acid. Okay, so proteins are made of what's called 20 different amino acids. I know this is a little science, but you guys, we all need a little science lesson now and then. It'll help us. It'll give us faith to see how awesome God is. Okay, But these proteins are made of long chains of amino acids. There's only 20 different amino acids, okay? So these amino acids, each one of them have to be just right. If one amino acid is in the wrong place, and some proteins may have 400, 500, 600 amino acids. Can you imagine? What are the odds of just every single amino acid in the right place out of 300 or 400? I mean, that's just, there's no way. It's never going to happen. It could never happen by chance. You do the odds and it ain't going to happen. Not that kind of odds, okay? And so you just think about how complex and what's going on inside the cell. It just blows your mind. But anyway, you've got these amino acids, and then once the copy is made in the DNA, okay, you have RNA, messenger RNA, and it takes a copy and it goes out of the cell and it goes up to the door of the gate of the nucleus and the pore, and it's not just like shoo, goes through. It's just not like a little hole there. It's like the most complex gate we can imagine. It's got sensors and all kinds of things. It comes up. No, you're not out of here. Sorry. You know, another, oh, okay, we'll open up to you, and it opens up, and it goes through it. It goes out and finds the ribosome. That's the machine. That's the manufacturing plant. Connects to that. The information is transcribed off the messenger RNA, okay, and then you've got these other RNA. Each one of them bring just the right amino acid in, and they line up with a code. There's a code there, not just random chance. There's a code there for just the right. The 3 letters there will match to the 3 letters on the RNA, and it'll start building, putting the amino acids together, one right after another. All have to be exactly right. And again, the chances of this, all you have to do was, just one protein, and the judge would say, there has to be a creator. It couldn't have happened. Just the probability is just one protein. And there are thousands of proteins, you know. And if one amino acid is not right, then it doesn't work. The whole thing falls apart and has to start all over again. It's just the incredible complexity. Okay.
The messenger RNA. This process is called transcription.
This is extremely simple here.
Before the messenger RNA can be used as a template for the production of proteins, it needs to be processed. This involves removing and adding sections of RNA. The messenger RNA then moves out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm. Protein factories in the cytoplasm, called ribosomes, bind to the messenger RNA. The ribosome reads the code in the messenger RNA to produce a chain made up of amino acids. There are 20 different types of amino acid. Transfer RNA molecules carry the amino acids to the ribosome. The messenger RNA is read 3 bases at a time. As each triplet is read, a transfer RNA delivers the corresponding amino acid. This is added to a growing chain of amino acids. Once the last amino acid has been added, the chain folds into a complex 3D shape to form the protein.
Okay, Cynthia, here's another thing that we don't think about. Just to make this protein, it took like 50 other proteins to make this one. And then those proteins make 50 other proteins to make them. And it just goes on and on and on. Can you imagine? To me, this is the most convincing evidence that there has to be a creator, because now this is really, really simple here. This is not anything compared. This is just basically just getting the basic, but it just gives us some idea of the complexity of a cell and how to make proteins.
All eukaryotic cells, from yeast to those that make up the human body, contain membrane-bound organelles with specialized functions. Mitochondria are double-membraned organelles that harness most of the energy that cells need to grow and reproduce. Nearly all of this energy comes from reactions that take place at the inner mitochondrial membrane. One of the key roles of this membrane is to act as a barrier to positively charged particles called protons, thus allowing a concentration gradient to be maintained where the intermembrane space has far more protons than the matrix. The membrane also contains a large protein complex called the F1-F0 ATP synthase, which uses the proton gradient to drive the synthesis of ATP molecules. These ATP molecules ultimately provide the energy for most of the cell's reactions. Just as man-made power plants produce electrical energy by using the flow of wind, water, or steam to rotate a turbine, the synthase makes ATP by using proton flow from one side of the inner membrane to the other to rotate protein subunits. If there is no proton gradient, synthase subunits stop rotating, and the cell can quickly become starved of energy and die. Therefore, the protein complexes and small molecules that establish this gradient and maintain it play an essential role in the life of the cell. At the heart of this system are 4 protein complexes, numbered 1 through 4. Complexes 1, 3, and 4 directly pump protons from the matrix into the intermembrane space. Complex 2 does not directly pump protons, but it does promote proton pumping in complexes 3 and 4. Proton pumping requires energy, and the 4 protein complexes get this energy by transferring electrons through a series of coupled reactions. This linked process of electron transport is why the 4 complexes are collectively referred to as the electron transport chain. Let's focus on complex 1. A byproduct of sugar metabolism called NADH deposits 2 high-energy electrons in complex 1, where they are passed along a chain of redox centers. Redox centers are clusters of atoms that have different affinities for electrons based on their unique atomic configurations. Let's closely consider a pair of redox centers to reveal 2 reasons why an electron moves from the top redox center to the bottom. First, the bottom redox center has higher affinity than the top one. Second, the distance between these adjacent redox centers is ideal for an electron jump to occur, which explains why electrons typically don't bypass the bottom redox center. A small amount of energy is released each time an electron is passed between redox centers. Complex 1 harnesses this energy across all the redox centers and uses it to pump protons. The last redox center in complex 1 donates 2 electrons to a coenzyme Q molecule. Complex 2 is similar to complex 1 in 2 important ways. First, high-energy electrons also enter complex 2 via a byproduct of sugar metabolism, although here the molecule is FADH2. Second, complex 2 also transfers electrons between several redox centers before donating them to coenzyme Q. One major difference, however, is that complex 2 does not use the energy liberated to pump protons.
Okay, Cynthia.
Coenzyme Q molecules
Now,
from
what this would be like, Sid right here was an electronics engineer. It'd be like him telling us what's going on inside a computer. I mean, we would go, I don't understand anything he's saying. And that's kind of like what's that. But you get the idea here, how complex the cell is and all the reactions that have to occur and everything that has to be just right. And to think that this just came about by random chance, I mean, it's absurd to the uttermost. So.
We don't know how much we still don't know.
That's right. Did you hear what she said?
I just said we still don't know how much we don't know. We know, we know some of this, but there's probably a lot more that we don't know.
I like that.
God is irreducibly complex.
Yeah.
Every time we go one quantum level deeper,
Yeah.
like we discovered the cell, we thought there were bags of water,
Yeah.
right? And then we go inside the cell and we find all these organs.
Yeah.
And then when we found out the organelles and what they do, then we go another level, quantum level deeper in understanding, and we start to understand the chemistry and the signaling. And then we go another deeper, and we're going to find something else. It's just like the atom was the smallest thing. No, there's subatomic particles. There was protons and neutrons and electrons. That is not physics today. We have the God particle. We have all these muons and gluons and other things, gravitons and other things, and we're starting to realize, oh my gosh, it's getting more complex the smaller we go. And the bigger you go, it's complex again, because it never stops. You're just looking at God's intellect, which is endless, at work.
Yeah.
That's why. You
Yeah.
cannot measure it. It's immeasurable.
Yeah. Yeah, we can't. How could he done it?
Now, he mentioned God, intellect. What about intelligent design? Where does that fit? Is the same word used like a creator?
An intelligent design movement, basically, it's just the idea that they're adding some more to the theory of evolution, saying, well, you have this explanation of theory of evolution. The scientists got together and they looked at what we're looking at right here, and they're saying the same things we're saying. This couldn't have happened by chance. Okay, so they're not designating who the creator is. They're just saying, okay, science needs to open up and say, yes, it's okay to say, because there's so much evidence points towards design, points towards creator. These scientists want that to be them to be able to say that there's another explanation, and it's far much better than the theory of evolution, and it's called intelligent design. Does that make sense? And they have a group that they belong to, and I think they meet in Seattle, Washington, and they have now they don't go around preaching the gospel. And there's some things that I would prefer they would talk about and they don't, but that's just one of those things, But I think it's good, and they make a lot of really good videos too.
So you're saying that the creationists have certain approaches to intelligent design as do the evolutionists.
Yeah,
Everybody's in the mix for that.
yeah. It's just they want that to be open. They want that allowed. In other words, what I'm saying is they want more than just one explanation. They want them to be able to prefer that there is a creator, there is.
Instead of religifying who the deity or creator is, they universalize it. So that way it doesn't offend. It's not like philosophically they're not trying to go into theology where you're saying, well, there's only one God, Yahweh, or there's only one God, Allah, or there's only one. They're saying that whatever the intelligence is, and I've seen a lot of these people will try to say it's alien technology. Well, then you go, well, who made the aliens then? Because you can just keep saying that endlessly. Well, or they'll say, this isn't even reality. We're all living in a matrix, which is not real. It's an unreal universe that's on someone's computer, some other notch up. Well, yeah, but who created that intelligence? So there has to be ultimately a universally intelligent creator, infinitely intelligent. Now, the Bible gives you an answer for who that is and describes God that way, right? But, the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, believed that the earth sat on the back of a tortoise, and they said, well, what's the tortoise standing on? And they said, it's tortoises all the way down. So philosophers don't have the answers either, right? But I get what you're saying, because we're like studied this for 20 plus years each, watching a Porsche engine firing off, and they're trying to describe how it all works, and you're like, whoever built it's a genius.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't take any intelligence at all. But you have to be a fool to say, that just happened by chance. And R.C. Sproul used to say, chance is not a God, which I love him saying that. It came about by time and chance. Well, chance is not a God. It's not a power. It's a calculation, like roll the dice. It's just a math equation, and math equations don't have power. They don't have the power to make this real or make this happen. So time and chance, time isn't anything. It doesn't have any power either. It's just a measurement of events happening in a series. So chance is not a God. When you start to think about what they're saying, this came about by time and chance. Chance doesn't have any power. It's a gambling calculation. That's all it is. It's a math equation. What are the odds I'll roll heads or tails or boxcars with dice? That's all that is. That is not an equation that can create that. You know, there's no power to it. It doesn't have the power to do anything. Sorry.
Time and chance does just the opposite, actually. Makes things go from order to disorder. And, you know, that's crazy. They would know that. You just leave something, it runs down, it goes from order. And yet they're thinking that time and chance.
At least the intelligent design says, or is starting to acknowledge, there has to be a supernatural or unknown creator. That's one step closer to seeing God, hopefully. Unless you're a fool.
But in our system, our educational system, it's just basically, there's no God.
Yep.
You know, there's no God. There's no intelligence. There's no design there.
It's just kind of a closed system like naturalism.
Yeah.
You don't go to the unseen world, and yet God is a spirit.
Mhm.
They worship him.
Yeah.
Us worship him
Yeah.
in spirit and in truth. So it just throws it in another whole level.
Yeah. I just thought of something when you were saying something. We know this is what's so crazy. We think all that exists is the natural, and yet the spiritual created the natural. So if the natural is this complex, think of what the spiritual is. Whoa. Yeah, look at the things. Absolutely. Well, I hope you all got something, and I hope you're prepared to at least get some people ready for the stuff they're going to deal with when they get out in the world, and keep some of our kids from falling away and, you know, dropping out of the church because they've been taught there's no God.